What's up, my squids? We have a great episode today. We talk about flexibility and performance. So what do we got to do? I mean, is it good to get more flexible? Is it good to improve mobility? Does this actually translate to the court? And if it does, what are the modalities that actually work? Hint, it's probably not static stretching. So we go pretty deep into the science, but we also give the practical takeaways. So if you're a kid watching this or a parent, you're going to be able to understand what the takeaways are. But if you're a high-level scientist, a strength coach, you're also going to enjoy the actual science that we went into in this episode. Let's get it. You're listening to the PJF podcast, a show dedicated to decoding elite sports performance and fitness. I'm Paul Fabritz, and I'm an MBA strength and conditioning and performance trainer. If you want to become superhuman, take your fitness, and take your sports performance to the next level, this is the podcast for you. Let's do it. Did you see what it was written on the board out there by the coffee machine?
I didn't.
It said, "What goes up but doesn't come down?" I've been trying to figure it out ever since I've seen it.
What goes up but doesn't come down?
Gas prices.
That's a good one.
My vertical. That's actually a lie because my vertical is down right now.
Yeah.
Sad days for my vertical. Every summer, my vertical hits very sad times because I travel so much. I'm in the car 3-4 hours a day. I'm in and out, bouncing back and forth to gyms. My workouts last 10 minutes.
You got to hit the stoplights or even when the traffic slows down.
Work out in my car?
No, hop out. Hop out. Put it in neutral. Just let it drift. Yeah.
The old bodybuilder trick people did used to like do isometric contractions in the car. Like squeeze your wheel.
Squeeze your steering wheel.
Yeah.
It's intense.
But that won't get me bounce.
It won't.
I don't know how to do it. I'm trying to figure this out. I mean, I could take away from my sleep, but then I can't recover from that workout.
Yeah.
Anytime I'm in the gym, I would rather get shots up and work on my handles. I'd rather maintain that. It's tough times. And then once the NBA guys go back, then I get back to my like 2-hour workouts and it all comes back.
That's nice. At least you have that.
Yeah. At least it does come back.
Seasonal.
What else?
Seasonal bounce.
Seasonal bounce. Yep.
Seasonal
what else
bounce.
goes up and doesn't come down? What goes up?
I can name a bunch of things that go down that don't go back up.
Yeah.
But I can't.
It's gravity.
My bank account.
That's a good one.
This is honestly a good test on like mind power.
Yeah, I'm failing. Maybe like a satellite. We send satellites up and they stay up.
Yeah.
But they got to come down at some point.
Eventually. Giannis's ceiling.
Maybe that's what they're looking for. Giannis's ceiling. Interesting. All right, well, we're not smart enough to figure this out, but hey, luckily we have a squid cult following us, and our squid cult is getting smarter by the session, and they're young, so they got brain power. They got time to think about stuff like this. So they're going to let us know in the comments.
Energy.
Yes.
Squid. Did they see the video? I saw a video the other day of the largest squid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably 50 people sent me that video. Because they know I love the squids.
That's funny.
Man, people ran with that. I didn't realize where we were going with that. That was actually just a genuine rant. Like I had no plan on coming up with the squid rant. And then people were just dropping squid emojis in my comments. Like I got like 100 squid emojis, which is actually the octopus emoji, but we'll take it.
Same family.
Yeah, and then there's people sending us emails like, "Hey, fellow squid here." Just like so serious. One guy, my favorite comment from last episode, a dude just quoted, what I say? Oh, this is a squid cult, and currently I'm the leader, and we're all just trying to rise in the squid ranks. Best quote of the podcast.
That's not bad.
That's a good
well thought out.
That could be a shirt. We're all just trying to rise in the squid ranks.
Yeah. I like that he was willing to take authority within the ranks.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was letting his place be known.
This is a squid cult. This is all there is to it. And we have individual squid cults within the squid cult. So we have this large squid cult, and then like you're the leader of your individual squid cult for your family.
That's interesting.
You're raising little baby squids.
That's interesting.
That's all there is to it. Smart and self-aware. That's what we're building. This is a squid cult.
That's a healthy cult.
Yeah.
That's a healthy
It's a
cold.
very healthy cold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's keep growing this squid cult. Today, how we're getting more self-aware and smarter is by talking about flexibility.
Tough.
It's a tough one, man. So we've been sprinkling in little tips about flexibility throughout all the podcasts. And even the guests that we've had on with Corey, we talked about flexibility. And I keep getting questions, more and more questions on flexibility because people are so tied to static stretching.
Yeah.
They refuse to get away from it. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to say, even though I'm going to present this information to you, it may not change the recommendation. I still think it's okay to static stretch. If you want to do it as a post-workout because it makes you feel good, cool. If that's what helps you relax, great. I'm fine with placebo effect. But you got to figure out what's important in your training and what's not that important in training, because like what I was just talking about, you might have 10 minutes in a day to work out. Or these kids who are busy with high school, you might only have 30 minutes. So you need to know, what can I cut out, right? If you think static stretching is important and you cut out your lift instead and you go, okay, well, at least I'll get in my static stretch, you're going nowhere. So
That's tough. I feel like there's a whole community, a large one, that was just indoctrinated into static stretching at a young age. And so they're like, well, no, this is...
Yeah. Even like back in the old certifications, they're still preaching this stuff. You could probably be at a university somewhere still learning this stuff. But the coaches and the scientists who are dedicated to this stuff, 99.9% of them have realized that the benefits of static stretching are overrated and potentially harmful. So let's go into it. So, okay, first of all, what are we doing when we're static stretching? This is the question that nobody actually knows.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's yeah.
And this is the issue, is because you don't understand like the mechanism. Nobody understands the mechanism. If I go ask somebody, a trainer who's obsessed with static stretching, if I said, why do you do that? And they would say, for muscle length. I'm getting my muscle longer. Well, no, you're not.
That's not how that works.
That's not how that works. You're not actually making your muscle longer. So there is some research from, what was the author's name? I think Sarman, that showed if you wanted to increase the length of your muscle fiber, you would need to hold a stretch for 30 straight minutes. That's not what people are doing, right? Now, before you go get crazy with that, we don't want that. We don't want that length change through static stretching. So don't go hold for 30 minutes. But basically, we have this stress strain curve. So let's just look at a rubber band. If I had a rubber band and I just didn't really apply anything, I didn't really pull, nothing happens. That's level 1. Level 2 would be the elastic phase. So I pull it and then I don't hold it very long. What happens? It just goes back to its original resting length. I made no actual change. That's what we're typically doing when you think of like these 15 to 30 second stretches. At the muscular level, that's not long enough to actually make a change.
Yeah.
So we're just in that elastic phase. No real benefits from a length standpoint. Level 3 would be a plastic change. So now I got that rubber band and I pull it out and I just hold. If I held long enough, let's say I hold it for hours, I could make a plastic change, an actual change in the length of that rubber band. That's not a good thing though, because now it loses its elastic recoil. So it's longer, so now I go to pull it back to shoot that rubber band and it doesn't snap back to its original resting length. So just because I pulled it back further doesn't mean that I got more elastic energy. That shorter, tighter rubber band after I pulled it back would have been shot further. Right? So I don't think we really want a plastic change in the muscles in most cases. And then the level 4 of the stress strain curve would be it just rips. Right? So if I held that for long enough, even at a low force, if I held it for long enough, at some point it's going to snap.
Yeah.
Right? So what people think they're doing with static stretching is level 3, plastic change. The studies do not support that, except for maybe the Sarman research. I don't know if it's Sharman or Sarman. We'll put it in the notes. But that would say, hey, you got to hold this for 30 minutes.
That was a very well articulated analogy. I enjoyed that.
Well, thank you.
I just want to note that.
So also keep in mind, We also don't know what we're doing when we're static stretching. Is it the muscle at all? Or is the limiting factor the tendon? Or are we just, what is the limiting factor to your flexibility? It could be at the joint level. So we're kind of naive to think that, the muscle is the limiting factor, when in reality you could be damaging some other structures by static stretching. Like if we are elongating the tendon, that's going to be an issue, because remember when we, pull on the tendon, when the muscle contracts and we pull on that tendon and the tendon pulls on the bone, if we don't have enough stiffness, we can't transmit that force to the bone fast enough. So that is what that rate of force development is all about. A stiff structure transfers energy faster and more efficiently. So we don't want to lose that stiffness in the tendons.
Yeah.
And so with static stretching, maybe we are doing that. What's more likely, and what the research would back, is that when we're static stretching, we're just making a change at the neurological level. So we're just changing kind of our nervous system's perception of that stretch.
Which is probably where that placebo is derived from.
Yes. And so basically we're not going to lengthen the muscle. It's going to be at the nervous system, and possibly the protective mechanisms are being turned off. So like stretch reflex, what Corey was talking about when he was on here, Corey Schlesinger was talking about, with static stretching, we're dampening the stretch reflex and the GTOs. These are protective mechanisms. They're there for a reason. So what, we think we're smarter than our body?
Yeah.
Like, you're there for a reason, but I'm going to turn you off. We don't need you. So that could be another explanation, is that you're kind of, you don't necessarily turn them off, but you dampen them and you push them to a lower point. So now when your muscle starts to lengthen, instead of that stretch reflex kicking in and then leading to a more explosive contraction, or leading to more co-contraction to lead to stability, which we want. Like if the foot is hitting down to make a hard cut, we want that stretch reflex to kick on so that we have enough co-contraction for stability. So if we turn that off, now we got to sink lower and lower and lower into our joints to then get that same stretch reflex. So that's not good. The thing that I hear is, one guy on Instagram recently was like, I think I posted on my story about flexibility, and then he goes, the point that you're missing is that if you build strength along with it, it doesn't matter. So you can continue to push for maximum flexibility. Get as flexible as humanly possible, as long as you're also building strength. Now, the problem is when you're building flexibility, you're changing the length-tension relationship. All right? So length-tension relationship. Basically, at a certain muscle length, you produce the most tension. So tension is force, right? So we want this. We need that optimal length to be in sport-specific positions. Now, what the research shows is we can possibly change that length-tension relationship so that now, instead of getting that optimal tension, I got to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into my joints to then hit that optimal tension. So you've seen these guys, good candidate here would be a CrossFitter who does box jumps. And they do jump high on the box jump. Like that's their thing. That's their sport. A lot of them get all the way down to the floor. They go to a deep squat position. That's not usable in sports.
Yeah.
So some people are being tricked because they're like, well, I'm jumping higher, right? If you test a standing vertical, you drop all the way down to the floor. Maybe you did jump an inch higher or 2 inches higher. But that's a problem because that showed me that your length-tension relationship is so jacked up for you to get your optimal tension, you had to drop down to the floor because you can't use that at any point in sports, especially basketball.
Yeah, the basketball, that's grade school.
Basketball is about high power and short ranges.
Yes.
So what can we do with minimal knee bends, right? So like, yeah, sure, if we're looking at pure power, maybe we do want to get you down to maybe a 90-degree knee angle or a little bit lower. Maybe that's still usable. Majority of the time, we're working with like 90, 60, 45, like more minimal knee bends. When you look at cutting, you don't cut with a deep knee bend. When we look at sprinting, we don't sprint with a deep knee bend. When we look at approach jumps off one foot, very minimal knee bend. The deepest thing that we would hit is an approach off, like a standing 2-foot jump or an approach 2-foot jump. But even then, we're never getting thighs below parallel.
Yeah.
And so if you show me that that's your strategy, you're telling me that you jacked up your length tension relationship. And it does not matter how strong you are, right? Like you could be the strongest man in the world, but if that's your length tension relationship, that's unusable power.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, keep in mind what we just talked about with increasing length, right, at the muscular level. Static stretching probably doesn't really do it. There are some methods that actually do increase muscle length or muscle fiber length. Eccentric training is the number one way, particularly full range of motion. Eccentric training is the number one way to increase the length. And when I say length, I mean increasing the sarcomeres in series. So you don't make the muscle longer because it has its certain origin and insertion, but you're making the muscle fibers literally longer. And so that we could call that more of a plastic change. What was the study? I think I've seen a few studies. Maybe I have it in here. But basically, they did only 2 sessions, and they separated them by 8 days. So they did a full range of motion eccentric training session. 8 days later, they did it again. And I think that length lasted for like 24 days before it reverted back.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's pretty strong. And then you look at the studies of doing like 4 weeks of full range of motion eccentric training. It's like pretty serious sustained length. It's not something like that just reverts back right away. Because like flexibility, how many times have you been out there stretching and then you take a week off and you're right back to where you were before?
Even the next morning, I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Nothing is permanent with static stretching. Okay, so if you're interested in more muscle length, eccentric training, full range of motion eccentric training is probably your best bet. And we'll talk about the other methods, the FRC and the other good stuff. But the research would support that eccentric training is where it's at there. Now, again, there's also some good papers. There's a really good review that I'll put the link of in the show notes. But it's basically on the length tension relationship. And so, hold on, let me actually look this up. All right, so I just pulled up this paper. Basically, after eccentric training, they went from full range of motion. So they stress in this paper that with full range of motion, at the bottom, you stress the passive structure instead of just the contractile element. So think about like if you went down parallel in a squat, you got to muscle your way out of that. But if you go to a full deep squat, you'll notice how you get a little bounce out of the bottom. That's those passive components kicking in. And so when you stress those passive components, more of that plastic change can be made in the muscle length.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's why they talk about eccentric full range of motion training being the best. But they did show that the length tension, the optimal length went from 50 degrees. I think they were looking at knee angles, 50 degrees. And then after training, your optimal length shifted to close to 70 degrees. So it really changes
that's a
pretty quick. And then, so there's 3 studies that have shown when you make this change, you decrease the amount of torque that you can produce, the amount of force that you can produce at the shorter angles. So it's not like you can just you change the length tension relationship and now you produce more at these lower knee angles. You also decrease what you could do. So essentially think about it like this. You're building muscle slack.
Exactly. There's always
because rate of force development is tension. We need tension. And if we have slack, we're not going to be able to get that tension at the angles and at the speeds that we want.
Yeah, it's super consequential based on who you are and where you are as a person. I'm somebody that's like, I have to have that part of my routine because I'm naturally just super elastic, super tight, which is cool sometimes, but it's also not cool sometimes because if I go and hoop for a few days and then I'm not building that full range of motion as well, then I'm like, and I feel that super rigidity and super tight, and I'm like, I want to go static stretch, but then I'm like, wait a second, science told me that's not what to do. Go do a 10-second deep squat. All the way down, hold it, and then come back up and rep that out a few times.
Yep. So the flexibility, range of motion, it is sport specific. How much do you need for your sport?
Exactly.
Because that changes, right? If you're a dancer, you need a lot of flexibility. If you're a basketball player, we got to be able to drop into the correct positions. Outside of that, we don't need that much more. I don't need you to be able to do the splits. Yeah. In fact, have you ever known an NBA player that can do the splits and stayed healthy?
I was going to say, I know one, and I don't want to.
Yeah, no. Yeah, exactly. No, there's a few, and they're not really around.
Exactly.
So, and that's part of the issue is you're still looking. I was reading Kobe's book last night. He's got a great book, very motivational, but he talks about static stretching. LeBron.
That's interesting.
LeBron does static stretching. These guys have been taught, right? They're not the scientists themselves. They've been taught by their old trainers that, hey, you got a static stretch.
And there could be, you know what I mean? Even somebody like LeBron, I feel like he has such a unique team around him that it's like that certain instances where it's the same kind of like, where it's just like, Tuesday of week 2, I do static stretching. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not something like,
they're probably very smart and they probably realize, hey, LeBron thinks this works. So we're going to keep it in, right? Because when LeBron came in, probably the correct thing to say at that time was you should static stretch. Yeah. Scientifically speaking, that was probably the right thing to say. And then since LeBron's been in the league, the research has been overwhelming. We're not doing that much with static stretching. And since he says, oh, it works, you keep it in.
Yeah.
Because, again, it might not do harm. Now, here's the big difference. Here's why LeBron can static stretch and not do any harm. Because there's a difference between stretching just to stretch and stretching to actually try to improve flexibility. If you're stretching and holding a stretch to the point where you're trying to really improve flexibility, you're going to that real discomfort. That's when you can make changes. These guys aren't doing that.
Yeah.
They're just holding light stretches, not enough to actually make a change. So it's enough for them to just kind of like feel better and get the mental benefits and placebo, but not make a real change. And LeBron is not that flexible. Yeah, I've seen him go through his routine. He's not overly flexible.
No, yeah.
I'm not saying he's like the tightest, but he's not overly, like active straight leg raise, you're not going to see more than 85, 90 degrees. No chance.
No way.
Kobe, I mean, he's the one, he preaches static stretching. You know, he would be at our gym his last 2 years of his career, worked out right in front of me at our gym, and I would watch him kind of do his routine because I like, obviously it's Kobe, you got to study everything he does. And, you know, he would go through a little bit of a stretch session, and he wasn't that flexible. Like, he's just normal flexibility. Yeah. He's nowhere near the splits. He's nowhere near past 90 degrees on an active straight leg raise. And I know his manual therapist. And so Kobe did a lot of things right. And he's not isolating these variables to find out which one is producing. So he's doing massage. He's eating the right way. He's doing the right strength training. He's doing proprioception, all that. And then he's like, oh, well, it was the static stretching.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's an honest mistake. A lot of us do that in all aspects of life. We're like, oh, something worked. Well, it must be this.
Yeah, I think that's it's probably from a psychological standpoint. It's because you're actually the one doing it. You're like, oh, I can static stretch myself. I feel the benefit from it. And hey, I had, you know what I mean? Most of the time without, self-myofascial release, procedures, you're like sitting there like you can't massage yourself to get a benefit out of it. You're sitting there stuck.
Yeah.
But, static stretching, you're like, hey, I did it.
Right.
It's part of my routine.
Right. And so, when we look at these guys in the NBA, none of them that stay healthy are extremely flexible. And if they are, they were probably a little bit hypermobile, hyperflexible to begin with. So one thing that, what's his name? He has a product called the Stretch Code that's really good. He brought a bunch of science. Charlie Weingroff. I think it's Charlie Weingroff. Yeah. So basically what he was talking about is like, well, hypermobile, hyperflexible, this is a genetic thing. And so some people are just built like that. And so when they stretch, they don't do as much damage because they have the bone structure for that. And to get into certain positions, they're not ripping through stuff. So if you're tight and then your hypermobile trainer is like, yeah, you should get like me. For this guy who is not genetically hypermobile to get like the hypermobile guy, they got to rip through some good stuff. You got to rip through protective mechanisms that we want. You have to change length tension relationships.
Yeah, that's tough too. That just brings me back to just being a youth athlete too, and sitting there and you're in that team environment and you're like static stretching is part of like the practice routine, and you're sitting there, you're looking to the left of your teammate who, you know what I mean, is genetically dispositioned to have the ability to get into those ranges, and you're like, crap, and you're forcing, you know what I mean, you're breaking through that.
You're breaking through the good stuff.
You know what I mean, and without even knowing it because you're told to.
Yes.
You know what I mean, that's fundamentally accidental bad coaching.
Yeah, well, and we know, like, we're talking about a pre-practice thing.
Yeah.
We know that can decrease power 10, 15, 20%. Like, by now, I think everybody knows not to static stretch before a workout. But yeah, like you're talking about, more than half of it, much more than half of it is genetic. Females, they're always going to be more flexible than males. Females are not actually stretching, but they still can sit close to the splits. Most of them are extremely flexible. Also why they tear so many ACLs, because their ligaments are more flexible. Males have much, much stiffer ligaments. It's protective. We want stiffer ligaments. So, yeah, I mean, Eric Cressy had a tweet the other day, found the tweet. He said, mobility advice from someone with crazy hypermobility is like lifting advice from a genetic freak who got big without training. Proceed with caution. Yeah. Exactly.
There you go.
That's exactly what it is. You can't just take advice just because somebody has it, right? Like, it's like taking advice because somebody jumps high. How did you get it? There's a lot of these guys that they just jump high.
Yeah.
Remember the story I was telling you about one of the best dunkers in the world told me that he just ate a lot of cereal, right? We're not going to take that at face value. It's like he thinks that that's what made him jump high. Gerald Green thinks that he jumps high because one summer he wore ankle weights and then randomly like he just took off. A lot of people are at that age where they're going to take off either way. Their body's maturing. They're ready for that transformation. And whatever they did in that summer, they're going to attribute that to increasing their bounce. I have this conversation with so many of our pro guys. Everybody gives me a different answer, and it's always hilarious of how they got their bounce.
Yeah.
And,
that's why they're pros, the confidence.
Yeah. So yeah, when you're taking advice from people who are flexible, you got to understand that they probably didn't actually get there through stretching. And for you to get there, you're going to rip through some good stuff.
Yeah. That's like me with my calves. How'd you get your calves so big, bro? I was born like this. Sorry.
Genetic.
Yeah.
Yep.
All the calf raises aren't going to do it.
When I'm talking about like full range of motion, eccentric stuff where we are making change, we use it because from an injury prevention standpoint, yes, that's a good thing, especially from pulling muscle standpoint, hamstring strain, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
That is going to decrease injuries. Everything just comes down to balance. And so like in the vert code, we'll do some like front foot elevated, front foot elevated split squats where we'll get very low. We'll get beyond our normal depth. We'll do some deep squatting. There's a lot of different stuff where we'll do deep RDLs. There's some different stuff where it is full range of motion, eccentric training, but we bring it in and then it's out. And then we go back to these partial range, and then we bring it in and we bring it out. So this is not something where we would keep in year round, unless you're like maybe where you always have that problem with being extremely tight, and it does limit you from sport-specific positions. So like me, I'm not flexible. Like if you just tested my pure flexibility, I'm not that flexible. But on the court, I can hit any low position that you want me to hit, right? I could hit any like vertical jump. I get down to the optimal knee angles. And so I don't need any more flexibility. So for me, it's like, hey, I could do this a couple different ways. I could have like one set of a deep range. So maybe my warm-up set, I go to like 50% of my max and I just hit full range. And then I start loading up and I get to my partials. Or you can do it like we do in the vert code where, you know, every second or every third phase, we bring in some more range of motion stuff. But you don't want to go overboard with this because once people hear, oh, that's what works, they go all in on it. That's what we want to stay away from, because at some point you're going to change that length tension relationship.
Yeah. It goes back to that trigger word, the squid. It's the self-awareness. You got to know where your length tension relationship is to start. You got to know whether you're more like you or more like me, and then treat it accordingly.
Yes.
Sprinkle a little bit more in or sprinkle less in. Maybe you're already there.
This is a major squid key.
That is.
At the end of the day, this is a squid key. Okay. Now, should we ever use static stretching? So if we're speaking from a science standpoint, it doesn't make that much sense. Now, there's a few things. There is one study that was pointed out to me by Charlie Weingroff, and it was some old Russian literature that was translated by the University of Minnesota. And what it showed was static stretching after an intense exercise session increased the permeability of the cell membrane, which allowed it to, I guess, soak up more of the anabolic hormones and soak up, I guess, some of the byproducts that were created in that training session.
That's interesting.
So that is probably the first thing that I've read that's like, maybe it can lead to some better recovery. Now, there's also, when you're looking at pure, like, performance outcomes, that's just a mechanism, right? When you're looking at actual performance outcomes, this group stretched, this group didn't stretch, results are the same. So it doesn't make an actual performance outcome in most of the research, but that is an interesting mechanism. So like my thing is this: most of the stuff that I do, it needs to be backed by the science or backed by the literature. And if it's not fully backed, it needs to have a really sound mechanism, a proposed mechanism that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? And then you feel it out and it's like, okay, I do like this and it is working. Because then it's one of those things where the data is going to come back and prove in 10 years that you were right all along. And so that is a sound proposed mechanism that how do
they even break that down? That's the only thing. That's like beyond my scope.
And that's what I don't know, because I don't know because I didn't see the study. And we also don't know, I mean, maybe it was just a cool down in general.
Yeah.
Right? Was it static stretching, or could you have just gone on a slow jog and then brought it down to a slow walk? And maybe it's just going from the high muscle temperatures down to the lower muscle temperatures, a traditional cool down, right? Because static stretching might help with that a little bit. So is it the stretching or is it just a cool down? I don't know. There's another proposed mechanism that I heard from a great article on painscience.com. I don't know who runs that website, but he's really good. Painscience.com. He brought in so many linked studies in that article. And basically, he went through by the category of, you say stretching does this, and then he brought in the studies. You're wrong. You say it does this, you're wrong. And he just like hated on static stretching all the way down. And then the one thing that he said static stretching does do is it makes you feel better temporarily. He said static stretching is scratching an itch. And I think that he linked a study that showed it could temporarily decrease this low level inflammation that we have in the muscles. So have you ever had, well, you're not a good example because you are tight, but like people even people that are extremely flexible, they always feel tight. And they're not actually tight. It's just, like I've had guys, some of the hypermobile guys that have come to me and they're like, yo, man, like my team's telling me not to stretch because I'm hypermobile. You're telling me not to stretch because I'm hypermobile, but my hamstrings feel tight. Yeah. Well, it's probably poor positioning of the joints, and there's other things. We need to strengthen certain areas so that we can get it into better positions. But what, you'll push them into a stretch, you give them what they want, meet them halfway, and you're pushing their leg back, and it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, and their knees almost to their chest, and you're like, dude, this is not healthy. Yeah. And your hamstrings are not tight. Yeah. So if you feel like that, stretching's not the answer. But basically, I'm going off memory here, but they're like when you feel that like little dull not soreness, but like a dull ache in the muscles. And when you just stretch it out, you static stretch it and it goes away. And so I guess the proposed mechanism was that that's a low level inflammation in the muscle. And when you static stretch it, that low level inflammation temporarily goes away.
That's interesting.
So it's a Band-Aid. Mm-hmm. So it's like if you woke up in the morning and every day you had a headache and you just took Tylenol, the Tylenol is not the solution. Exactly. You should figure out why you have a headache every morning.
Yeah.
Are you dehydrated? Is it 2 kids? Yeah. So, so that's a proposed mechanism, is that it gets rid of this low-level inflammation that a lot of people have.
You know what that reminds me of is just, you know what I mean? Because I've had, knee surgery, ankle surgery, shoulder surgery, and that's always the first step of physical therapy is just, and then a lot of therapists, they're just lazy where they just keep you your entire therapy process. You're literally just static stretching for the most part. And I've actually fortunately seen, when they call themselves like strength therapists instead of physical therapists, where there's like this entire community of physical therapists saying like, hey, lazy guys in our field, like stop just static stretching your clients to death because you're actually not doing anything except for giving that little placebo boost and that little feel good.
You're just scratching an itch.
Exactly.
Scratching an itch.
Scratch your itch. Okay, come back and see me again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's doing us such a disservice.
So the reason why we still keep a we have an optional static stretching circuit at the end of our workouts. And so maybe the Russian literature is correct that's been translated. I don't know. Maybe it is. More than likely, it's not doing anything, but it gets them to lay down. It gets them to breathe. It takes them from sympathetic to parasympathetic. It's a decent cool down, and it satisfies that placebo. And so that's why we keep it in as an option. But if you want to skip it, I'm completely fine with that. If you're tight on time, I'm cool. But you do got to understand that athletes stress out about not doing everything. So they'll go home and they'll be like, oh man, I didn't static stretch. I'm going to mess up my whole workout. Yeah. Now all of a sudden they're in that stress zone. They're kicked back into their sympathetic because they're stressing about what they missed out on. Mm-hmm. It's better off to just meet them halfway in the middle and be like, here, dude, static stretch. We're not going to push to a point where it's going to make a change. I'm going to hold a light static stretch so that you can just be satisfied. But okay, what other type of stretching should we be doing? Because not all stretching is static stretching. So in the vert code, most of our mobility stuff involves movement. Mm-hmm. It involves loading. And when I say loading, I don't necessarily just mean with weights. Loading could be like loading a position with your body weight. Mm-hmm. So like what we do with the ankles, instead of just holding an ankle mobility stretch for 30 seconds or whatever, we'll drive the knee over the toe, keeping that heel down on the ground. And then from that end range position, we'll slowly step up out of that. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm kind of, pushing that stability at end range. I'm loading the joints instead of just stretching them. We'll do some deep squat stuff where we sit at the bottom of the squat with a dumbbell in front of us, and then we'll kind of just like rock side to side. So that's what I would consider loading. That's creating changes in very different ways than purely static stretching. Yeah. So I would say if you're tight, it's full range of motion strength training, eccentric strength training. Any mobility drills that you do, it should probably involve movement. Exactly. It should probably involve muscle contraction. Mm-hmm. And so in the vert code, we'll also do quite a bit of FRC concepts, functional range conditioning. So basically that's like we're getting to end range. So we're pushing a muscle towards an end range and we're strengthening at that end range. So we might hit like isometric contractions. And so then your brain's going, okay, we're getting stronger at end range. And then it starts to allow those range of motions.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what you should be doing.
Yeah. So like, especially when it comes to injuries, like being weak at end range is dangerous. So that's where a lot of the injuries happen. So like at short ranges and end ranges, we need to start to build that isometric strength, and a lot of good things can come from that. Now, just like the theme has always been of this podcast, anything that can be your best friend can also be your worst enemy if you go too far with it. Mm-hmm. So look, I love FRC, but in the FRC course, what they talk about is, hey, this does change your stretch reflex. this does push your stretch reflex to a lower position. And that's one of the reasons why it works to increase range of motion. Okay, another Eric Cressy tweet. I've seen 2 fire tweets in the last couple of weeks. So this other one, don't be so quick to vilify tight. It may lead to some injuries, but it's made a lot of guys really athletic too. So I agree with him. Now, what I think it might have been last episode or the one before that where we were talking about in our database, the tight guys actually missed less games. And so it's important to distinguish what type of injuries we're looking at. So people look at more injuries. They're looking at, oh, you're tight, well, you strain more muscles. But the hypermobile guys are having more catastrophic injuries, like they're tearing ACLs. And so when you look at total games missed, yeah, the tight guy might have a hamstring pull once a year and he's out for a week, but the hypermobile guy might be out for the season, or he might have ended his career by now because he's damaged the joints so much. So it's really important to also look at that because, you know, anybody listen to this, when they start to dive into the research, they might be tricked because you're just looking at the wrong stuff. So when you're looking at something that says like, oh, when you have more range of motion or when your muscles are longer, you are going to decrease injuries. Well, let's look at total games. So for me, if you're extremely tight, yes, we may turn out to be the guy that strains a hamstring too often. But if we're hypermobile, if we're hyperflexible, we're going to have the joint injuries. Let's be somewhere in the middle.
Exactly.
It always goes back to this. Notice that every topic that we talk about, we always go back to let's find out how to get towards the middle and let's find out how to be balanced. We want to be healthy, but we want to be explosive. Because look, if you want to say, well, I'm going to take away all the tightness, I'm going to decrease all the stiffness. Well, now you're slow, so you're safer, right? Like,
yay, a contortionist.
Yeah, like you decreased your risk of straining muscles, but you did it at a cost of decreasing your performance. So you know where you're going to be now?
On the bench.
Couch.
Yeah.
Not even the bench. You
didn't even make the bench anymore.
There's like the margin of error. Well, at the highest levels, the margin of error is so small that most people, when they lose a step later, I mean, there's a few that are like smart enough or they shoot well enough to still hang. Most people, if you lose a step and you get slower, you're done.
That's the NFL right there. That's the story.
Oh yeah, that's facts. So that's like I always say. You know, it's not all about safety. Like if it's purely about safety, then let's stop playing basketball.
Exactly,
let's go sit on the couch and let's casually exercise. I can get you healthy. Oh, that's the goal. Bet. Let's not play sports. But if you want to play your sport, you're going to need to be fast. You're going to need to optimize your quickness, your vertical jump, and it's going to be best done through having an adequate amount of stiffness. Oh, okay. I like this. I think I got this from the Pain Science article. So he cited this 1983 Sports Illustrated article, which it's so cool. I love seeing coaches that had it right all along. Because if you're saying this stuff in 1983, you know how much hate he was probably getting?
That's true.
He was probably like, people were probably thinking that he was the biggest idiot, but he was right all along. 1983 Sports Illustrated article about David Moorcroft, a British world record holder. Anderson is his coach. Anderson dismisses the stretching that most runners do. It's rubbish, he says. Nobody says rubbish anymore.
That's true.
We need to bring that back.
Rubbish.
Can we do that?
I don't know if it was ever necessarily an American thing. So
we can make British.
It. Yeah, we can make it.
Let's bring it to this. Let's bring it to the squid community.
That's fair.
It'll be one of our things. We need a squid dictionary.
Squid dictionary. Yeah, rubbish.
Okay, so rubbish is in the squid dictionary. But he went on to say the received idea that by touching your toes you lengthen the fibers in your hamstring is wrong. 1983, this dude had it right. Dave requires flexibility and joint mobility, but running fast is the right kind of stretching for him. The world record holder mutely demonstrates his suppleness by reaching towards his toes. His fingertips get down to about mid-shin. So he's saying, beautiful. Yeah. So he's saying basically like, hey, this guy is the world record holder. He can barely touch his mid-shin, but he has enough flexibility for his sport.
To run fast. Yeah.
And we don't need any more than that. And he's saying all that he got, his amount of flexibility was through the sport.
Through running, yeah.
And so when you look at like a lot of the basketball players who we like look at, like Kemba Walker, Kyrie Irving, these guys who are moving in these low positions, they didn't stretch their way there.
Yeah.
They hoop their way there. Exactly. They hoop their way there, and they put themselves in those situations, and your sport ends up forming you in some ways. And so sure, there's some stuff that we can supplement in the weight room to add to that. And like I talk about, we can look at these guys and reverse engineer it and go, okay, what mobility do they have? And so if you're 18 years old and you don't make those changes like that, well, okay, let's supplement, let's add some extra stuff. But for the most part, if you're playing enough and you're challenging your stuff, you're challenging your handles, you're challenging those low positions on the court, you're going to get all the flexibility and mobility that you need. And then in the weight room, I think that we look at these positions and we say, okay, how can we strengthen these positions? How can we build stability in these positions? Because we're going to see them on the court, and so we should stabilize them in the weight room. But yeah, man, I love that little piece.
That guy, he needs more credit.
He needs more credit, man. He didn't even stretch though.
Yeah.
Okay, so
everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so warm up. That's interesting. We should give a practical takeaway on warm up. Obviously, we're not going to static stretch in the warm up. We know this. Yeah. This is well established. Now, if you do static stretch, for whatever reason, I don't know why you do that, you have to do a dynamic warm up after, and that negates the downside. So normally if you static stretch and then you go into a vertical jump, decrease 10, 15, 20%, whatever in power. But if that's followed by a dynamic warm up, then that goes away. So you're not going to get a performance benefit, but you're not going to decrease.
That makes sense.
So the static stretching didn't have any effect as long as it's followed by that dynamic warm up. But don't static stretch. Get into your dynamic warm up. Now, I still think that dynamic stretching overall has an effect, and this is more intuitively. The data actually doesn't really support that at a high level. And so we know that warming up decreases injuries, but is it the stretching or is it increasing tissue temperature?
Yeah.
Because in a dynamic warm-up, you increase tissue temperature. But some would argue that you could do the same thing by going out. If I go out on a track and I'm going to go sprint, I can walk and then jog faster and then jog a little faster and a little faster and then a slow sprint and then a little faster and a faster sprint and then rest and maybe rest a minute or two and let that sit in and then kind of bounce around a little bit and I'm good to go. The number one thing probably for a warm-up is increasing tissue temperature and body heat.
Yeah.
That's the non-negotiable. And so for me, it's like, why not increase that? Maybe have this little like cardio, like we do some basic skipping stuff just to increase your tissue temperature, your body.
Well, it's like that, you know what I mean? I remember going to LA Fitness at 18 and going to hoop with the older guys at lunchtime, and they'd be like, they'd have to go sit in the sauna for 10 minutes before we'd start playing. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm like, this is the most efficient way to get warmed up. And so that was the intuitive way of just increasing that body temperature.
Right. So like for me, I'll still do the static stretch, but I want to do some type of like cardio, whether it's a slow jog or just like skipping. Like we start our dynamic warm-ups with skips. So then when we're going through our dynamic warm-up, since we're on the move, we are increasing tissue temperature. Now what we want to do is prime the mobility that we have in our dynamic warm-up. We never want to push for more mobility in the dynamic warm-up. I think that's where if you're pushing for more flexibility and more mobility, that's when we're going to get those negative effects from the nervous system of this nervous system depression, decreasing activity. And that's what harms the exercise session. So I think we want to prime the mobility that we have. So what do we have? Do we have an overhead deep squat? Okay, well, let's do an overhead deep squat and let's work through those ranges. But that's not the time to push for more range. So yeah, we want to increase tissue temperature. We want to prime the mobility that we do have. We want to rehearse the skills that we're going to go through. So if it's a big squat session, we should probably squat. Maybe we go body weight and then we go a goblet and maybe we do a light set and then we really get into it. And then we want to activate the nervous system. We want to get the nervous system going. So that could be like little short 5-second agility drills, moving as fast as we possibly can. Maybe that's doing 5 vertical jumps, jumping as high as we can. Just different things to actually get that nervous system fired up and going, instead of just like increasing tissue temperature and then expecting to go like squat heavy or go do plyometrics. Like, you got to bridge that gap. So like the thing that I love is when my players don't know when the warm-up ended and the workout started.
Yeah.
It's like that transition period is so fluid of like, we went through that warm-up and then maybe we did some extra activation and mobility and we activated that nervous system, and you're just straight into your workout.
Yeah.
It's like you don't know where it starts and stops. But yeah, like I still think that you can prevent some injuries by doing a good dynamic stretch before you work out. And dynamic stretch, you're not going to be holding stretches for much longer than a second or 2 seconds. It's very quick. Think about how your dog stretches. Like my dog, I study Millie, man. Like she's interesting. So she'll get off the couch if she's been sitting there for a long time. She'll get off the couch and she'll leave her back legs up, and then she'll just like sit into it. And so she's stretching her hip flexors, and she holds it for 2 seconds, and then she just carries on. I've never seen her hold it longer than 2 seconds. And I saw somebody post a picture. I think a cheetah was doing that same thing, like sitting into, obviously not on a couch. I hope you don't have a cheetah on a couch. But the cheetah in the wild was like doing this little stretch, but like they do it for like a second or two, right? And like a lion stalks its prey. That's its dynamic warm-up. It's increasing tissue temperature. Yeah. Maybe when it stood up, it did hit like a quick 2-second stretch, but it is not. No animal is holding a static stretch.
Yeah.
Let's follow the animals. Did you see the gazelle that swerved the lion?
Yeah.
Oh, that was so sick. That was such a good cut.
Yeah.
He was smooth off, dude. That was so sick.
It was the composure, really. It was you know what I mean? It was.
Yeah. It looked like it was planned out. It definitely wasn't, but like the gazelle went to run and it was like, I'm gonna die, and then just cut the other way. It reminded me of Barry Sanders.
Yeah, that
straight up.
Yeah, that gazelle's a hero.
Yeah. But yeah, okay. Stretching in our dynamic warm up, I'm cool with it. On our lower intensity days, we throw in some mobility drills. Most of it involves movement. We do early on. We do some PNF, contract, relax. So that's basically contract, and then we relax and sit deeper into that stretch. And the only reason I do that is because early on, if you're tight, it can make that temporary flexibility improvement, which allows us to get into deeper ranges of motion to then train and cement those ranges of motion. Like, never do PNF or any stretching technique just to do it.
Yeah, it's the accessory to the...
It's what you do with that range of motion. And that's likely, well, we might get into this later, but it's likely why foam rolling works, because it does. The one thing that we know foam rolling does is it temporarily improves flexibility. Or mobility. And so when we do that, then maybe we have, who knows what it is, maybe it's a 20 or 30 minute window. Well, now let's go train in those ranges, and let's cement it with actual strength training. But the foam rolling itself, that's not going to lead to long-term changes. So yeah, I mean, if you're extremely tight and you want to do some stretching here and there, that's fine. But at some point, we got to get away from it. And then even remember, if you want to increase range of motion, full range of motion, exercises that involve an eccentric are going to be the best, but don't take that overboard, because when we do, we're going to mess up our length tension relationship.
Find your happy medium.
Yes, a big problem in science in general is we look at the vertical jump. The vertical jump, it's not that good of a test. You can fake it. It's not representative of your sport, because what matters for the vertical jump is the total amount of impulse that you produce. And so increasing the total amount of the peak force is pretty tough, but you can increase the time that you produce the force. If I get down in a super low position, I increase the time that I produce force. And so the impulse goes up. So our relative impulse goes up, velocity of takeoff goes up, vertical jump goes up. But that's fake, because you did that for this test. In a game, you can't produce that force over that long period of time. because quickness matters. There's time constraints in sports. And so that's why, most training studies, it's like, okay, we're doing this, and then we're going to test on the vertical. That doesn't mean that you actually improve your sport. Yeah. And if you messed up your length-tension relationship with that training modality, that study is going to show, hey, this works for power because it improves vertical jump, but maybe it ruined your single leg jump. Maybe it decreased your ability to stay stiff and get out of your cuts. Maybe it decreased your sprint speed. Like there's a lot of other factors that science often doesn't look at. And so be careful when you're looking at, okay, improving range of motion is always good. You might be jacking up that length tension relationship, and that might not help you on the court.
Exactly.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in to episode 10. This one was highly requested. In all the comments you guys talk about, do an episode on flexibility. Let us know if you want us to do some more on this. I think we've pretty much nailed the coffin shut, and I think you guys should really understand what you need to be doing for flexibility. Hey, if you want a structured program, check out the vert code programs. We got the vert code bodyweight, vert code elite. People are getting insane results on the program right now. Check it out at pjfperformance.net. Have a good one, guys.